Hey millionaire! We all know celebrities somehow go broke all the time, despite the giant checks they earn for every job. But you might not realize that this has been happening since the beginning of Hollywood. That's right, it's not just modern actors who can't handle their money. These days, stars go broke a lot more than they used to. But there are a handful of the icons of classic Hollywood who should have their names added to the list of broke stars. Here's our list of classic actors who went broke, dating back all the way to the 1920s. But be warned, some of these stories are pretty gruesome. Let's take a look at our list of movie legends who went completely broke. Number 6. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake was one of the most famous femme fatale to ever grace the silver screen. She was a smash hit for a moment in Hollywood. Even if you don't know who she is, you've seen her iconic peekaboo hairstyle on another icon, Jessica Rabbit. So how did a star that was big enough to inspire Jessica Rabbit's hairstyle go broke? Well, to answer that, we need to go back to the beginning. Veronica Lake was once known as Constance Frances Marie Okelman before she became a star. She was born in New York to a working-class family. Her life changed when she was 10, and her father tragically died in an industrial explosion. She moved around a lot after that, and that's maybe partly why she was such a horrible person later in life. She had no interest in Hollywood, but her mom realized what a beautiful teenager Veronica was, and she became one of the first aggressively pushy Hollywood moms. Still, she was right, and Veronica became a huge star. But it wasn't all good news. Her co-stars and directors hated her diva attitude, but it was her hair that was the real end of her career. See, at the start of World War II, women went to work in factories while the men were serving in the army. But so many women were injured at work because their long Veronica Lake-style hair was getting caught in the machines. Lake was asked to change her hairstyle in the hopes of other women would copy her. She agreed, but without her iconic hair, her movies started becoming box office flops. With her bank balance shrinking, she gave up on Hollywood, abandoned her family, and flew the family plane to New York. There, she started drinking heavily and totally disappeared. After a few years, a journalist found her working as a cocktail waitress under a different name. She tried to make a comeback years later, but all the years of heavy drinking had ruined her good looks. When Hollywood decided to honor her with a Walk of Fame star in 1960, she was horrified to see that only 3 fans showed up to the ceremony. She passed away in 1973 due to kidney failure. Number 5. Baby Peggy. Hollywood's million-dollar baby, Baby Peggy, was one of the world's first child superstars by the age of 2. She was so famous that her father was negotiating million-dollar contracts for her in the early 1920s. She even had dolls and other memorabilia made in her image, which always sold out. But it definitely wasn't all good news. She said she had no friends at all during her early childhood, which must have been pretty hard. Worse than that, her career ended suddenly when her greedy father got into a fight with a producer. That producer totally canceled Baby Peggy's contract because he was so angry with her dad. The family then discovered that Baby Peggy's granddad had stolen all her hard-earned money. This was all at the start of the Great Depression, and soon the family was so poor that they lost their farm too. But the story doesn't end there. When she was only 8, she was already determined to be a writer. The adult Peggy made her own dreams come true, and she had published at least 5 books under the name Diana Sarah Carey by the time she died in 2020. Childhood stars seem to go broke all the time. Hit subscribe before another Hollywood child has all their cash stolen by a family member. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And don't forget to keep watching for some shocking stories about how superstars went broke in old Hollywood. Number 4. Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle's story is one of the most infamous trials that ever took place in Hollywood. But be warned, this story comes with a trigger warning. Arbuckle was one of the biggest stars of the Hollywood silent era, known mostly for his comedic roles. He was also a pretty successful director, screenwriter, and one of the most liked men on the silver screen. In the summer of 1921, his film Crazy to Marry was playing in cinemas. It was another smash hit. So, one of Arbuckle's friends arranged a huge 3-day-long Labor Day weekend party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco to celebrate. Arbuckle wasn't really happy about that. His work schedule was stressing him out, and he just suffered second-degree acid burns to his buttocks. But when Arbuckle woke up to find his hotel suite filled with guests the next day, he didn't have much choice but to join in the party. Of course, it was his friend who invited all the people to Arbuckle's room. Arbuckle was a little concerned about seeing Virginia Rapp and Maud Delmont arriving. They had reputations as wild party girls, and this was the days of prohibition. Arbuckle was worried their presence would alert police to all the booze in the hotel room, but he had no idea how much trouble they were about to cause. Rapp was a beautiful, aspiring actress, but Delmont mainly made her money in a very shady way. She hosted big parties so she could accuse high-profile men of assaulting young women and extort them into giving her loads of cash. She had an extensive criminal record due to these crimes, and she's clearly not the kind of person you want at your party if you're a high-profile star like Arbuckle. And sure enough, within hours, she was telling the police about a terrible crime that never happened. Delmont's story went like this. Arbuckle and Rapp had a few drinks together before he pulled her into a room, saying he'd waited 5 years, but he had her now. After a few minutes, Delmont said she heard Rapp screaming, but she couldn't get into the room. A few minutes later, she said Arbuckle came out of the room smiling and wearing Rapp's hat. Rapp, meanwhile, was sprawled on the bed, and when she saw Delmont, she shouted out, "Arbuckle did it." Tragically, Rapp really was in trouble. A doctor was summoned for her. After a few days in the hotel, she was transferred to a hospital. She died from a ruptured bladder the same day. Of course, that looks pretty incriminating, but Rapp told the doctors that Arbuckle had definitely not assaulted her, and she wasn't the only one. The story everyone else at the party told was nothing like the one Delmont had told the police. Their real events, retold by everyone else who was there, was that Rapp had been very drunk and started shouting that she couldn't breathe and ripping her clothes off. After a bit of chaos, Rapp was eventually found throwing up in the bathroom before she passed out. Arbuckle and several other guests had tried to wake her up. Then they moved her to a separate room and called the doctor. But by the time anyone had a chance to tell the story, the newspapers had already taken Delmont's story of a vicious assault and ran with it. Police couldn't ignore it. Arbuckle turned himself in and was held in jail for 3 weeks before being charged with manslaughter. Unfortunately for Arbuckle, it wasn't just Delmont who wasn't on his side. District Attorney Matthew Brady saw Arbuckle's trial as a perfect opportunity to jumpstart his career in politics. He was going to stop at nothing. Of course, he was having trouble with his star witness, Delmont, who couldn't keep her story straight, so he cleverly made sure she wouldn't have to testify, so nobody would realize how many holes her story had in it. He also kept another crucial detail quiet. Attorneys had received telegrams from Delmont saying, "We have Arbuckle in a hole here, chance to make some money out of him." But nothing could save Arbuckle now. Not even medical evidence that proved Rapp had a chronic bladder condition, and her body showed no signs of violence. Even the doctors who testified that Rapp herself said Arbuckle didn't touch her couldn't help. Witnesses came forward with damning evidence about Rapp's past, but Arbuckle said he wouldn't let them testify out of respect for the dead. In the end, there were 3 trials, all ending with Arbuckle being acquitted. But by the third one, his bank balance was near zero, and motion picture censor William Hayes banned Arbuckle from appearing on screen. His career was over, and a little more than 10 years later, he died of a heart attack at the age of 46. Number 3. Sammy Davis Jr. The Rat Pack singer Sammy Davis Jr. was a star in more ways than one. He might be best known for his smooth music, but he sure made a mark on Hollywood and Broadway throughout his career. Even after losing an eye in a car accident, he started out at the age of just 3, performing vaudeville with his dad, Sammy Davis Sr., and his uncle, Will Maston. He struggled through racial prejudice early in his career to become one of the first genuinely popular African-American stars, and he sure did have a huge following. His career was pretty astounding, and he worked with greats like Bob Fosse on both Broadway and the silver screen. One of his best-known starring roles was in the film Ocean's 11, opposite his Rat Pack friends Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. He had an astonishing career, but in 1989, he went to see a doctor for a tickle in his throat and was diagnosed with cancer. This was probably due to the 4 packs of cigarettes he smoked every day, but that didn't make it any less tragic when the cancer came back after treatment. He died in 1999, but his passing wasn't his family's only worry. At the time of his death, his estate was worth about $4 million, which is about what you'd expect from a star of his caliber. But unfortunately, he wasn't a fan of paying his taxes, and he owed the IRS a whopping $5 million. And it only got worse. With all the interest and penalties he owed on the $5 million, the total amount was actually a whopping $7 million, and his wife was now responsible for the debt. She was forced to auction off some of her personal possessions, as well as his real estate, to pay the debt. It was so bad that some of his famous friends, including Quincy Jones, held a fundraising concert to try to help her pay off the debt. Luckily, it worked. She finally reached a settlement with the IRS 7 years after his death. Tell us your favorite star from the early days of Hollywood, and keep watching to find out who took our #1 spot. Number 2. Judy Garland. Judy Garland was the sweetheart of Technicolor. She was born to a theatrical family and made her debut on stage at just 2.5 years old. She was incredibly talented as an actress, singer, and dancer, and she was already a star by the age of 10. She was so good that MGM, Hollywood's biggest film studio, signed her on without any screen test. But even with all her iconic performances, you could bet she's best known for her role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, which to this day is the most watched film in history. Her success in Hollywood kept growing, so much that it even overshadowed a surprisingly successful career as a singer. In 1959, doctors told her that the decades of working harder than just about anyone in Hollywood has taken its toll, and she'd have to quit to save her health. But instead, she responded by staging a gigantic series of one-woman comeback concerts that toured the world for a year. She then switched to TV with The Judy Garland Show. But there was a tragedy happening behind the scenes. She'd become seriously addicted to drugs. A series of financial troubles meant her house was possessed. She continued working right up until her tragic death due to an accidental overdose at the age of 47. She was a staggering $4 million in debt at the time of her death, considering she was still very much a star at the time. And finally, number 1. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi was a Hungarian actor best known for his iconic portrayal of Dracula in the Universal films. He had a pretty interesting life, starting when he ran away from home at the age of 12. He worked odd jobs, one of which was stage acting. He had a pretty extensive acting CV by the time he moved to the US in 1921. But he'd made a bold move, considering he hadn't exactly mastered the English language. As a result, he only made 1 or 2 films in America in the 1920s. But in 1927, he landed his star role as Dracula in the Broadway production. Of course, his thick Eastern European accent suited the role perfectly, and he was a hit with audiences. He toured with the show for 3 years before reprising the role in 1931 for the Universal film. Universal released their other smash hit, Frankenstein, that same year, making them famous as the biggest horror film producers in the country and etching Lugosi into pop culture history. So how did he go from superstar to broke? Well, even though he made a couple other popular films after Dracula, his fame didn't last. He quickly became addicted to drugs and slipped into poverty. He checked himself into a hospital for treatment, but it didn't save his career or his bank balance. His last film was Ed Wood Jr.'s unintentional cult hit Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is well known for being one of the worst films ever made. Lugosi can be seen standing outside his real home in the film. He died in poverty before the film was finished and was buried wearing his cape from Dracula.